Hello friends, it's me, Jaquel, that witchy system from TikTok. And I say it like that because I'm pretty sure that's just how I'm known now. I think I accept this. Hello internet, it's me, Jaquel. It's been a while. I could explain where I've been, but quite frankly, I don't think that I want to. It's been rough. For real, the last sit-down video I made like this, just to hang out and talk to the audience, was in May of 2024. It's March of 25. But, dear friends, there is a reason that I am here today, and that reason is the Patreon AMA. At the beginning of February, I opened a Patreon, and along the way, I decided to open it up for an AMA. Ask me anything.
That kind of thing.
I'm honestly starting to think that I don't know how to be in front of the camera for a YouTube video anymore because it's been so long. What the fuck am I even supposed to do with myself? That's right, AMA. But before we get into it, I want to be very clear about something. I do not make content for children. And the reason that I bring this up comes with a little bit of an anecdote. A few days ago, I was picking up my son from school, and as I was waiting out front for him to come greet me, another child walks up to me and says, "Hi, are you Dad?" I look down at this small child and I say, yes, I am. To which they then respond and say, "My mom subscribes to your YouTube." But admittedly, there was a part of me that was a little flattered. But there was an even louder voice screaming, "Oh my God, I hope this child isn't watching my content." I do not make content for children. I don't intend to. I don't care to. Children are not my target Children are not my target audience, and I aim to keep it that way. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get to the AMA. Danielle says, "Damn, I need to think of a good one, but I've had too much Red Bull and vodka tonight. I'll be back." Danielle did not come back and did not get around to asking a question. Seda commented and said, "I'll spend the night thinking of a good question, but I'm sure it will come to me tomorrow while I'm on the toilet." Unlike Danielle, Seda did come back to ask the question. Okay, got one. You can be any god, deity, spirit, demon, whatever the fuck. What would you be? Give as many or as few details as you would like. I would be Hecate, but not Hecate. There's a reason this bitch is the goddess that I have been working with for the longest, although it hasn't always been the most pleasant experience, and although we have had our disagreements and even parting of ways from time to time, Hecate is a deity that I see myself in a bit, not necessarily because I can relate to a deity in the way that a human can relate to a human, but the more that I learn about Hecate, the more that I think to myself, I want to do that. I want to be more like that. Magic, liminality, witchcraft, spooky shit, helping the people cross over after they die, giving them a place if they can't cross over. There are so many things about Hecate that's sort of like the archetype that I want to embody. So yeah, Hecate. Sarah asked the question, "Are you familiar with Domus Chaotica, Marauder Underground, or DKMU? If not, that's fine, but it was a group I was in the aught. You just seem so familiar." First of all, Sarah, thank you for being pretty much the only person that asked a non-witchy question. With that being said, none of that sounds any kind of familiar to me. Now, on the Clock app, you've gotten across to this before, and I feel like this is just you asking more directly, so here it is. I've lived in the Midwest my entire life. There was a period in time I was in a couple of different bands with my half-brother, and we didn't grow up together. I lived with my mom, he lived with his. But once we actually became a part of each other's lives when we were in our teens, we got into a lot of trouble together, let's say. We were a part of the local punk scene, and we tried so many times to form a band and it just never went anywhere. But if you have ever been somewhere between Milwaukee and Chicago, you may have seen me at any of the venues, because I used to go to concerts as an excuse to socialize and see live music, do my damnedest to meet people. And back in my teens and early 20s, I was a very social person, and that is not the case anymore. But I don't know where you would have seen me. There are a lot of people in my life throughout high school. People would walk up to me and be like, "Hey, Dan." And I remember it was a Dan. They always thought I was some person named Dan. I don't know who Dan was. I never met Dan. I apparently have a very recognizable face. I am a very mid-level, average-looking person. I'm not saying that this isn't attractive. I'm saying I wouldn't do me. But regardless, people have said that I look like Daz Black or Daz Games, which I don't get. I'm not like a fan of his content, but I'm familiar with his content to an extent. I feel like I get compared to Daz Black for the same reason that when I was a teenager I got compared to Andy Milonakis, which is why it drives me fucking banana sandwich. I am a mid-chubby white dude with brown hair. I also don't get why people have compared me to John Cusack, but at least he's not chubby, so that makes me feel better. Kizu asked the question, would it be possible to make a video about vetting deities? You know what to look for if it's not who they say they are. Now, I did already make a video on TikTok, but I feel like it's worth going over here, especially since it was on the AMA and I was going to turn this into a video from the get-go, so let's get into it. I'm not sure if I am the person you want to ask. And the reason I say that is, I've been messed with to such an extent, I don't even remember how many times. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I feel like it's something to expect if you're going to get into this deity work shenanigans. For myself, in the very least, I have come to accept it as something that is inevitable. It's a part of the process. And instead of shying away from it and that experience making me afraid, I just buckle down and do worship. Because I am one of those people who believes that they can psychically communicate with spirits, both divine, both of the unrest dead, yada yada. I'm one of those people who believes that. But I also believe that the human mind is faulty, and even when it's working at optimal capacity, it is still flawed. So when we try to have some kind of spiritual experience, you never know what's actually going on. You gotta take almost everything with a grain of salt and be willing to reevaluate it later. Are you talking to your imagination? Is this a maladaptive daydream? Even with my experience, I gotta second guess myself all the frickin' time. And to that extent, I also want to add in here that I do not believe that any person who is clairaudient or a psychic medium who is honest with themselves is going to believe that their communications are clear and pure and pristine every single time. So here is the way that I go about it. Because it's not really vetting at this point, it's having faith. Not necessarily this blind devotion, it's more or less having faith, believing without seeing, that in spite of what I think I'm talking to, what I think I'm communicating with, the actual deity is actually hearing me. So, say I got this nice little drink, this adult beverage here, and I will then say, to Hecate. If I am in communication with what I perceive to be a spirit, I'm not going to say, to you, for you. I'm going to say, to Hecate. That way, I know that this little devoted drink is actually in Hecate's name, not whatever the hell is out here that I think is Hecate. And it is in this, the way that I worship, the praxis, that I lean more on what I am doing that is actually in honor of, that is in devotion to the deity, in spite of what I think is going on, then they are going to actually get what I am giving to them. And there's this thing that, since most of the gods that I worship, and if we are going to put a label on what I do, it would be Hellenic polytheist, I'm doing the thing in what I believe to be the proper praxis. It doesn't matter if there's an imposter. The strength, the connection between me and that deity is being strengthened, regardless. And eventually, the ability that this imposter or trickster has, their influence, is going to lessen, because that deity who I'm actually worshiping will remove them. And that bond is being weakened because there's nothing actually being given between this imposter and me. And I hope that helps. Effie asked the question, what is a solid beginner way to work on intuition and communicating with spirits or the divine? Everything that I just said responding to Kizu, let's start with that. Let's just carry that on over, and this is basically the same conversation. First of all, fuck intuition. And the reason that I say that is because the way people talk about intuition is that it's this psychic gift. They talk about it like it's one of the clear senses. So I want to ignore all of the discourse about intuition, shake that as Etch-a-Sketch, and let's start with instinct. Jedi Wisdom 101. Feel, don't think, use your instincts. Now, when I am talking about instinct, I am talking about your body's physiological responses to external stimuli. You're here because your ancestors survived. You're here after millions, if not billions of years of evolution, and everything that comes from that farthest line down to you, that shit is in you. Whether you want to call it some kind of spiritual essence of your ancestors being passed down to you, or just biological things built into us being human that we largely ignore because we are sophisticated animals. There's a large part of our human experience that, because we're not used to seeing it or feeling it or understanding it or categorizing it, we think that it is supernatural. But that a lot of people who live in a modern day and age don't need to rely on the instincts that are still here in us. A lot of us don't live a life where we are under constant threat. We're not out there hunting and gathering anymore. I think what I'm trying to say is, there's a lot of shit that's still here that we don't talk about, and that is a part of what I am saying when I say instinct. Quiet your mind, listen to your body. Your body is telling you things whether you're paying attention to it or not. So we're going to ignore intuition, and we're going to try and find a way to quiet our mind and listen to our instincts. What is our body telling us? What is our body saying when we are in a new environment? What is going on what are we feeling when we do ritual invocation, or we start to do some kind of pagan worship, or we start to, I don't know, I started doing this when I was paranormal investigator ghost hunting. I would quiet my mind, listen to what my body was telling me so I could have an experience and also pick up on what was going on around me. And I think it is because of that experience that I am here today, able to do what I do. And that is for starters. Anything past this point would probably require its own video, where I'm talking about my own theory of mediumship, and that as a medium, you're basically a transmitter for external frequencies, and maybe I will make that its own video at some point, I don't know, but I don't want this video to be an hour long. Take what I said at that last question and put it together with this, and just let yourself grow and learn to trust in your instincts, and also have faith in your practice, and from that point, communication will feel a certain way, and you will be able to learn the difference between communication and what's just in here. Nurbiyukimaz asked the question, why are some gods associated with planets or stars? Because people like naming things after the things that they love. Okay, let me get into it from there. The names of the gods came first. When we are thinking about the names of, let's say, the planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. The gods were named first. And a lot of those names actually are Etruscan in origin, because when Rome was doing their thing to rebrand the Roman gods to incorporate the Greek stories, they also sort of like idealized, if not fetishized, this Etruscan culture. And with that, they started doing this Frankenstein's monster of, ooh, that looks good, but that's not the same. The Greek gods and the Roman gods are not the same, but we're going to steal their stories, we're going to steal their names, and here's Mars. With that, when the planets were being discovered and people were observing these celestial bodies as something other than stars in the sky, they became named after the gods. And that typically is the same thing with any star or constellation. And I'm talking more of like the Western Mediterranean sort of thing. It's going to differ depending on the culture, the region, the time in which that culture was doing the thing. It all varies. It all is going to be different depending on the frame of reference that you have. But if we're going to talk about the typical Western model that we now have today, a lot of the gods came first, and because they were pagan, they named the gods and the stars after pagan deities. And a lot of times there are also stories or myths that go along with this. But, where do I start? A lot of the reason that those myths were made was not to explain what happened, but to explain a justification as to why it should be so. Here's a hot take. The myths didn't literally happen. And yet, there are reasons why certain myths are important, and we should try to do our best to understand the proper cultural, historical, and religious context, such as the Hades and Persephone marriage story. It is found in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, where that is the conflict. And it is important to keep in mind that Hades abducted Persephone against her will, the entire experience being against her will, and with that, she was assaulted. It wouldn't have been seen or understood as assault in that context, but now that we understand these things differently and better now, we can go back and look at it and say, oh no, she was raped. The reason that this is important in that myth is because the target audience was the people. Why was that important? Because bridal abduction was something that happened. And something that this myth did that other stories did not was show how horrific it was. And it brought the attention of this traumatizing practice, and it showed the grief of the mothers, and it showed the trauma of the daughters that were abducted, which was almost never done before that. That's why that myth is so important. But does it even matter if Hades literally abducted Persephone and literally sexually assaulted her? That's a better question that I'm going to answer later, if I ever answer it at all. But a lot of the myths aren't meant to be taken literally. Sometimes they are poetry or theater or play. Sometimes it's music, like the hymns are poetry that when they were written had some kind of prose and music to it. Some of it is social commentary, like the Homeric hymn to Demeter. So if there are some kind of stories to explain why, they're just stories. And I hope that helps. I hope that answers the question. Dahlia asked the question, what is the best way to first interact with the deity and give a good impression? I personally choose the Hellenic pantheon to be my go-to pantheon. And in many ways, if I were asked, I would say that I am a Hellenic polytheist. But that doesn't mean that my practice is limited to those deities. I spent some time practicing Cometicism. I have often returned to working with demons or the infernal divine. And the approach to each one is so different. But I don't think it is required unless you are doing a specific ritual or you are doing a specific thing to recreate perfectly and identically. As for the best way to first interact with a deity, again, it depends on that deity. That's where it's going to be very deity specific on top of pantheon specific. But sometimes the individual deity specific is going to come before the pantheon specific. It really depends, which is part of why a lot of us, myself included, stress that research is necessary. And in the very least, it's going to help round out your understanding to sparse the experience as you are experiencing it. But a good way to give a good impression is just be you, unapologetically, without holding back. And I think there is something to be said about the way we assume what that means, because for some reason, when in pagan and occult spaces, if you say, just be yourself and don't hold back, there are a lot of people that are going to say, oh, that's disrespectful. Bitch, are you trying to tell me that being yourself is disrespectful? If anything, being yourself is an offering in and of itself, because you're not trying to blow smoke up their ass. You're not trying to fluff their ego. You're being yourself. And you're being honest and upfront with them about what you want and why you have called on them. Now, I'm not saying be disrespectful. There are still basic customs and ideas that go with any of the pantheons and any of the deities, but if you don't know that yet, and they actually want to work with you and be a part of your life, they're going to help guide you to understand. Are you really going to punish somebody simply for not knowing? Why? Also, please don't mind too terribly much the baby noises in the background. I have a baby. She's in there. She's safe and she is fine. And she is not alone. She's currently learning how to crawl. Okay? And she's not quite there yet. She's skipping steps. She's gone from sploot, like a corgi, directly into Mowgli from the Jungle Book. So she plants her feet, lifts herself up, and butts in the air, and she's not using her knees. And she's pissed off about it. And she does it over and over and over and over, all day, every day, doing the same thing repeatedly. And I have tried to help her. I've tried to give her guidance. It's like she wants to be pissed off, but I'm also looking at it from my own adult brain. She doesn't want help. She wants to figure it out on her own, but she's doing the same wrong thing repeatedly. And she gets loud about it.
Cat, I am holding the baby.
And that will conclude the February AMA. We are going to do another one for March. And honestly, point blank, full transparency, I'm trying to incentivize people. This video is brought to you and sponsored by Kizu 1385, Lily Schofield, Arctic Light 21499, Rachel Van Alstein, Joplin _11779, Fletcher _Wolf, Medeiros.Quill, D McKenna 2233, Past 17388, Irish Baby Girl, and Zanko Kuruz. I mispronounced that. Thank you all for being paid patrons for the month of February. This video is made possible by you. Thank you. And if you are a paid patron, at the time of my uploading this, you saw it days before anybody else, because it went up on Patreon before it went up on YouTube. If you want access to content exclusive only to Patreon, go check it out for $10 a month. This includes, but is not limited to, a bunch of TikTok compilations, a private link to the Funky Frog Bait video that I did a response video to a video that they made where I was in it and I didn't know it until people came to that very specific video to talk shit about me because they came from Funky Frog Bait's comment section. Yeah, I took it down because I was sick of their bullshit. But you can go get it and watch it right now for $10 a month. And there is a free option where you will be able to be a part of community discussions, ask questions in the upcoming AMAs, and the only real downside is that you don't really get the exclusive content unless you pay for it. Please consider And that will conclude today's video. If you're still here, I want to thank you for listening. And as always, take care and much love.